a strange obsession, a pursuit of perfection that teetered on the edge of the macabre. The quest to be beautiful was not about health, but about projecting a certain image, an image of fragility, of wealth, and of a life lived far from the sun's harsh gaze. This was a world where a pale, almost ethereal appearance wasn't a sign of sickness, but a badge of honor. In this ancient society, a healthy tan was a mark of the lower class, a sign of a life spent in fields under the unforgiving sun. It was the color of manual labor, a hue of poverty. The aristocratic, on the other hand, cultivated a complexion that was luminous, almost translucent. Their skin was so light it appeared to have never encountered daylight, and they achieved this look at any cost. To attain this ghostly pallor, they turned to a peculiar cosmetic, a white lead powder. It gave their skin a smooth, matte finish, a luminous glow that was the height of fashion. It was the ultimate status symbol, a subtle signal of their privileged existence. But this elegance came with a hidden price. The lead-based mixture, while making them look like delicate porcelain figures, was slowly poisoning them from the inside. They endured chronic fatigue, skin ulcers, and even premature death, all for the sake of beauty. Yet this dangerous trend persisted because the alternative, being mistaken for a common laborer, was far worse in their eyes.
The pursuit of this aesthetic went beyond just skin tone. They also embraced the trend of a high, smooth forehead, which they considered a sign of intelligence and refinement. To achieve this look, they went to extreme lengths, including the complete removal of their eyebrows and even their hairline to make their forehead appear taller. They used strange depilatory concoctions made from odd ingredients, all in the name of showcasing a face that projected a sense of divine grace and contemplation. It was a world of beauty with a dark side, where elegance was achieved through methods that were both bizarre and self-destructive. It was a time when the human desire for perfection led to the use of some of the strangest, most hazardous substances in history. But what drove them to these extremes? Why were they so willing to risk their lives for the sake of appearance? And what other bizarre secrets lie hidden within the pursuit of beauty in this forgotten era?
In the quiet of a noble's chamber, a girl stands before a polished bronze mirror, her expression serene, her brow vast and smooth. The ideal of beauty in this era was not a face to be remembered, but a canvas to be admired. The hair, pulled back from the forehead, revealed a high, uninterrupted plane of skin. This high dome was a marker of elegance and intelligence, an unspoken declaration that this individual did not toil under the sun. It was an aesthetic so coveted that it drove people to remove their eyebrows entirely, seeing them as nothing more than facial weeds. This obsession wasn't confined to a single court. It was a fashion that swept across the land. From the grand halls of England to the opulent courts of Italy, noble women embraced the high forehead, and artists of the day immortalized this look in their paintings and illuminated manuscripts. For those who couldn't achieve it naturally, there were clever tricks. Some women would feign the look, using intricate headbands and veils to create the illusion of a higher hairline. It was a form of ancient contouring, proving that the desire for perfect aesthetics is truly timeless.
Just as the face was a carefully curated masterpiece, so too were the cheeks. A subtle blush was the desired look, a gentle rose hue that suggested youth and vitality. But it was a fine line to walk. Too much color, and you risked being seen as vain, or worse, a commoner. The goal was a look that seemed effortless, as if the flush was a natural reaction to a moment of quiet grace. Wealthy individuals would use a variety of ingredients, from crushed strawberries to the sap of certain plants, to achieve this delicate tint. For the most fashionable, even lead and other toxic minerals were used, a final act of devotion to an aesthetic that placed beauty above health. In this world of subtle symbolism and dangerous elegance, every detail was a statement.
From the pale, translucent skin to the smooth, hairless forehead and the carefully placed hints of color on the cheeks, every feature was an artifact of a culture that valued artifice over nature. But as these people strove for a beauty that was ethereal and symbolic, one question remained. At what point does the pursuit of an ideal become a complete transformation of the self? And what happens when the lines between art and reality begin to blur? In this era, blonde hair was more than just a color. It was a symbol of youth, radiance, and purity. It was the gold standard of beauty. For those not naturally blessed with this coveted shade, they turned to strange and sometimes unpleasant concoctions to lighten their hair. Recipes included everything from honey and saffron to less savory ingredients, all applied to the hair before a long period of sunbasking. It was a painstaking and often risky process, but the promise of a celestial shimmer made it worth the effort. Hair was a sign of status and a powerful symbol of a woman's place in society. For an unmarried woman, long, loose hair was a sign of innocence and purity, a strategic asset to be displayed. But upon marriage, a woman's beautiful hair was immediately hidden from public view under layers of linen and silk. This was the world of veils, wimples, and headdresses, a uniform of modesty that concealed the radiant locks that had once been so prized. Yet even within these strictures, fashion found a way to flourish, with elaborate nets, jeweled caps, and starched veils that turned a simple covering into a work of art. The rise of the cone. As the era progressed, a new obsession took hold: height. This wasn't about stature, but about the towering, cone-shaped hats known as hennens. These magnificent headpieces, which could reach incredible heights, were a visible symbol of a woman's status and nobility. The taller the hennin, the higher her rank. Made from fine silks and brocades, often with a cascading veil, these hats were a masterpiece of engineering and a testament to the extremes of fashion. To wear one, women went to great lengths, even shaving their foreheads to create a smooth surface for the hat to rest on. Comfort was not a consideration. These hats were an elegant burden, a bold declaration of one's place in society. They were so elaborate and fragile that they required a unique way of moving, and their sheer height made navigating doorways a dangerous art. Yet, despite the impracticality, the hennin reigned supreme, a testament to the unyielding power of fashion. The fragile ideal. Beyond the face and hair, the ideal body was a canvas of delicate grace. The goal was a slim, soft, and slightly ethereal figure, a look that suggested a life free from physical labor. There was no emphasis on strength or athleticism. Instead, the ideal woman was a vision of refined frailty. This was a body type that spoke of wealth and status, a figure that seemed to exist on air and poetry. But what happens when the very symbols of beauty, the pale skin, the delicate figure, the towering hats, are also signs of a life lived far from the sun and soil? What other bizarre and dangerous secrets did this quest for an impossible ideal hold?
A graceful figure. The ideal figure was not one of strength, but of spiritual elegance. The focus was on a narrow waist, soft curves, and a fragile appearance. Dresses were designed to give the illusion of height and frailty, with waistlines often cinched high to elongate the torso. While modern corsets were not yet in use, tight lacing of undergarments achieved a similar effect, emphasizing a delicate, ethereal form. Yet this wasn't about being sickly. A hint of roundness was considered a sign of health and fertility, a silent promise of survival. The silent language of the eyes. Eyes were considered the windows to the soul, and in this era, they were a silent power.
The ideal gaze was large, clear, and soulful, conveying a sense of virtue and quiet melancholy. Light-colored eyes were especially prized, associated with innocence and purity. To enhance them, women used subtle techniques, a hint of black powder to make the eyes appear bigger, or simply relying on the strategic flicker of candlelight. Eye contact was a delicate dance. Too much was seen as brazen, while too little could be seen as secretive. The perfect balance was a demure glance from beneath lowered lids, a subtle art of quiet communication. The hidden secrets of a smile? While poets and artists idealized beauty, they rarely spoke of what was hidden behind a person's lips. The reality of dental hygiene was a far cry from modern standards. Teeth were important for function, but a perfect pearly smile was a rarity. The ideal was a closed-lip smile, a demure expression that hinted at a quiet thoughtfulness rather than a boisterous joy. This was a practical approach, as most people had teeth that were far from perfect due to a diet rich in starches and a complete lack of modern dental care. Instead of brushing, people used herbal powders and chew sticks to maintain some level of cleanliness. The quest for beauty in this era was a blend of art, risk, and social convention. From the delicate, almost fragile body type to the carefully guarded smile and the expressive silent eyes, every aspect of one's appearance was a carefully curated statement. But what other curious obsessions drove these people to such great lengths? And what can these bizarre beauty standards tell us about their culture? The male ideal. For men, the ideal of beauty was a strange mix of readiness and refinement. The perfect male figure was lean and broad-shouldered, a look that suggested a noble air without hinting at manual labor. He was the kind of man who could swing a sword with ease, but would never be caught hauling barrels. A defined jawline and high cheekbones were highly sought after, as was well-groomed hair, often worn at shoulder length with a hint of curl. This look was so popular that men even used heated rods to style their locks, a testament to the importance of appearance. Clothing helped to create this look, with padded shoulders and cinched waists that enhanced the silhouette. The goal was to appear naturally noble, effortlessly handsome, as if one's appeal was simply an inherited trait. The art of scent. In a time when bathing was a rare luxury, the management of scent became a true art form. To combat body odor, people turned to herbs and oils. The nobility carried small, hollow balls called pomanders on chains, filled with fragrant spices like cloves and rosemary. These were essentially portable shields against unpleasant smells. Perfumed gloves, handkerchiefs, and even combs were also used to add a pleasant aroma. While people did bathe, it was not a daily ritual. Instead, they relied on layers of linen that could be washed more frequently, and on herbal sachets to add a touch of freshness. Beauty as a moral compass. In this era, beauty was not just an aesthetic, it was a moral statement. A person's appearance was often seen as a reflection of their inner character. To be beautiful was considered a sign of a pure soul and divine favor. However, there was a strict line that had to be maintained. Vanity was a sin, and showing too much interest in one's own looks could lead to accusations of pride or seduction. Women were constantly warned that their beauty could lead men astray. In this confusing world, one was expected to be naturally beautiful, but never appear to be trying too hard. The unblinking eye of an empire. The Immortals were far more than just soldiers. They were the living, breathing heart of a vast empire, a symbol of unyielding power and eternal might. Their story begins in the 6th century BCE, at a time when the Achaemenid Empire was rapidly expanding its borders, devouring nations, and transforming into a colossal force. The founder of the empire, Cyrus the Great, understood a fundamental truth. An empire is only as strong as its military.
He needed a force that was not only powerful in battle, but one that could also enforce his rule, inspire unwavering loyalty, and crush any whispers of rebellion. And so, the Immortals were born from this need for an ultimate fighting machine, a personal guard for the king, and a force that embodied the very essence of Persian dominance. The name they were given was no mere title. It was a carefully crafted piece of psychological warfare. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, their numbers were always kept at exactly 10,000 men. If a soldier was killed in battle, fell ill, or was otherwise unable to fight, he was immediately replaced. The number never dropped, never wavered. To their enemies, it seemed as if this force could not be diminished, could not be defeated, and could not die. The message was clear. You were not fighting against individual men, but against an eternal, unstoppable tide of imperial power. These men were not chosen at random from the general populace. They were the best of the best, selected from the noble families of Persia. Their training began at a young age, and it was brutal and unforgiving. They were taught not just to be warriors, but to be a reflection of the empire's highest values: discipline, order, and unquestioning loyalty to the king. They were a perfect fusion of skill and purpose, a walking, talking symbol of the king's absolute authority. Their appearance was as intimidating as their reputation. They wore finely made tunics over scale armor and were equipped with an arsenal of weapons: a spear, a bow, a short sword, and a wicker shield. But their gear wasn't just for battle. It was a political message. A Persian king didn't just send an army. He sent a mobile political message wrapped in silk and steel. From the scorching deserts of Egypt to the windswept plains of Lydia, the Immortals followed the king, their presence alone often enough to make an enemy surrender. When you saw the Immortals marching towards you, you weren't just looking at soldiers. You were looking at the eternal heartbeat of an empire. You saw a force that did not blink, did not retreat, and would not be diminished. This was the true essence of their power, a terrifying and absolute symbol of enduring might that conquered not just with steel, but with an unshakable myth of immortality. A shadow of war? Unlike the gleaming Greek soldiers, the Immortals appeared less like men and more like a myth. Their elaborate uniforms of richly dyed tunics and trousers, often in deep reds and purples, concealed a layer of scale armor. Their shields were made of woven wicker, light enough for swift movement, yet durable enough to withstand a barrage of arrows. But their most striking feature was the felt cap, a tiara, which could be pulled over the face to hide their identity. In stark contrast to the Greeks' focus on individual glory, the Immortal strength lay in their uniformity. 10,000 men moved as one, a silent, disciplined wave of destruction that could overwhelm any foe. They carried a bow, a short sword, and a spear, and their training emphasized agility and endurance over brute strength. This made them a versatile and terrifying force on any terrain. When they marched, their expressions were eerily composed, devoid of emotion or bravado. There was no boasting or roaring, only a synchronized precision that made them seem more like machines than men. To face the Immortals was not just to face death. It was to face an unstoppable, relentless concept of imperial might. The life of a legend was a life of immense expectation and constant scrutiny. These men were not just soldiers, they were a living embodiment of the empire itself, and their lives were completely controlled by the state. From the moment they joined the ranks, they belonged to the empire, not to their families. Training began in childhood, where they learned to endure pain, obey without question, and prioritize the formation above all else. There was no room for individual ambition or personal glory. An immortal who stood out too much was corrected, for the unity of the group was sacred. Their daily life was a strict routine of training and discipline, with modest communal meals and no luxuries. When they were not on campaign, they served as the king's personal guard, acting as his eyes and ears. They were trained to detect lies, sense fear, and act decisively to maintain order. They could be summoned at a moment's notice, and a man who hesitated even once could be quietly replaced. This cold, efficient system of absolute control was what maintained their legendary reputation. The number of immortals always had to be 10,000, no gaps, no delays. It was a perfect, unending system that ensured their myth would endure for generations. The mystery of their appearance and the ruthlessness of their discipline made them a force unlike any other. They were a perfect, unblinking symbol of a great empire's power. But what other empires followed this example, creating their own versions of this formidable force? And what can these legendary warriors tell us about the nature of power and control in the ancient world? A tool of empire. The Immortals were not just soldiers, they were a finely tuned tool of the Achaemenid Empire. While Cyrus the Great founded this elite force, it was under the rule of Darius the Great that they were truly perfected. When Darius seized power, he used the Immortals to legitimize his rule, transforming them from a personal guard into a symbol of his authority. He paraded them at festivals, stationed them at his capital in Persepolis, and sent them on high-profile missions to project an image of order and inevitability. Under Darius, the Immortals became a key part of Persian combined arms warfare. They trained rigorously, moving with terrifying efficiency alongside archers, cavalry, and chariots. They were experts in ranged combat and siege warfare, firing volleys of arrows while advancing slowly behind their wicker shields, never breaking formation. They were also used to brutally suppress the frequent revolts throughout the vast empire, acting as a message and a punishment, a clear sign that the king's will was inexhaustible. This era cemented their reputation not just as elite warriors, but as instruments of fear and retribution. They were more than a military unit. They were institutionalized fear, woven into the very fabric of the royal image and deployed with chilling precision.
The clash at Thermopylae. The legend of the Immortals reached its peak under the reign of Xerxes the Great. Their reputation was put to the ultimate test at the narrow mountain pass of Thermopylae in 480 BCE. This battle was a symbolic clash between two vastly different worldviews, the unstoppable force of the Persian Empire against the defiant spirit of the Greek city-states. At the center of this storm were the Immortals. Xerxes brought the Immortals as his personal vanguard, a living symbol of his power. The Greeks had heard the myths of the 10,000 who never died, and they knew they were facing a force unlike any other. But at Thermopylae, they met an unexpected resistance. King Leonidas and his small army of a few thousand Greeks, most famously 300 Spartans, held the narrow pass against wave after wave of Persian attacks. The myth of the Immortals was about to be challenged by the unbreakable resolve of the few. A crack in the myth. On the second day of the battle, Xerxes unleashed the Immortals, expecting them to easily break through the Greek line. But at Thermopylae, the myth of their invincibility was shattered. The narrow pass rendered their bows useless, and their shorter spears were no match for the long lances of the Greek hoplites. For hours, they fought the disciplined Spartans, and for the first time, the legendary Immortals suffered heavy losses. The illusion of their immortality cracked. They bled, they fell, and the world saw that they were, in fact, mortal.
However, even in defeat, they remained terrifying. They adapted, regrouped, and fought on. Their immortality wasn't about being invincible. It was about their unyielding endurance. The relentless machine. The true genius behind the Immortals wasn't their skill, but their system. A cold, efficient, and relentless bureaucracy. When an immortal fell in battle, became ill, or retired, he was instantly replaced. There was no mourning or ceremony, just a seamless substitution. The number of immortals was always, without fail, 10,000. This was no poetic exaggeration. It was a logistical masterpiece. The Empire maintained a constant pool of young, trained men ready to fill any vacancy at a moment's notice. This system of administration was the Immortals' greatest strength. It was a living machine of excellence, constantly regenerating and evolving. A network of officers, scribes, and quartermasters ensured that every man was fully equipped and supported. If a soldier was lost in a distant land, a replacement was already on his way. This machinery was designed to project imperial power and terror. The illusion of 10,000 unchanging warriors was a psychological weapon. When an enemy killed one immortal, another immediately stepped into his place, erasing any sense of personal victory. The individual was irrelevant. The presence of the unit was eternal. This system, which prioritized the collective over the individual, was what truly made the Immortals a force that could never be defeated, only endured.
Diplomats in armor. The Immortals were far more than just warriors. They were an extension of Persian imperial power in every sense. In the Achaemenid worldview, military force was not just about conquering, but about maintaining an imposing presence. The Immortals were often deployed not just to fight, but to be seen. Their silken robes, gilded weapons, and perfect discipline made them a mesmerizing spectacle in times of peace. They would accompany ambassadors to foreign courts, not for protection, but as a living symbol of Persian elegance and power. In the provinces, the Immortals were stationed to remind local governors where true power lay. They were always there, watching, their mere presence often enough to stop a rebellion before it could even begin. At the royal court, they served as ceremonial guards, but also acted as an intelligence agency, rooting out traitors and enforcing the king's will with silent efficiency. This dual role of warrior and diplomat, enforcer and ornament was part of their genius. They understood that fear and awe were siblings, and they fought wars without ever unsheathing blade. But all empires and their legends must age. In the final years of the Achaemenid Empire, the Immortals began to change. As the kings grew more concerned with luxury and courtly intrigue, the Immortals transformed from hardened warriors into mere royal ornaments. The strict recruitment standards began to slip, and political favoritism allowed unworthy nobles to join the sacred ranks. The result was a unit that still looked the part, but had lost its spirit and heart. This decay became tragically obvious when Alexander the Great invaded Persia. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, the Immortals were outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. The myth of their invincibility was shattered for good. The machinery of instant replacement, which had once made them immortal, had faltered. The unit never recovered. When Alexander entered the royal palace, the Immortals were not there to defend it. The unbroken line had finally been broken. The enduring influence. Yet, their story did not end with defeat. The idea of an unbreakable elite fighting force lived on. Elements of the Immortals' tactics and discipline were adopted by Alexander and his successors. Later, a new elite force in the Sasanian Empire would rise, echoing the original myth of the 10,000 strong, fearsome, and eternal warriors.
The Persian Immortals may have vanished from the battlefield, but their influence never disappeared. Their legend endures not because they won every battle, but because they represented something larger, the perfection of state-controlled power. An army that didn't age, didn't question, and didn't falter. They showed the world how to build not just an army, but a legend. A new kind of legend. To the Greeks, the Immortals were an eerie, unnatural sight. They were accustomed to war as a chaotic and personal affair. The Immortals, however, were precise and faceless, a force disciplined to the edge of humanity. Their influence lived on long after the fall of their empire. Roman scholars, Byzantine historians, and Arab chroniclers all reference them as the ultimate example of organized power. Even centuries later, Napoleon Bonaparte studied their structure, and their legend seeped into modern myth. They weren't magical beings, they were terrifyingly human, ordinary men transformed into instruments of empire. Their greatest weapon was not their sword, but the terrifying idea that they were an eternal shadow on the horizon, a power that could never truly be destroyed. The real Amazons. Before the myths of the Greek Amazons, there were the Scythians, nomadic warriors of the Eurasian steppe. Unlike most ancient societies, Scythian women did not stay at home. They rode horses, wielded bows, and fought in war. This wasn't an exception, it was their culture. Greek historians like Herodotus were astonished by them, describing how Scythian women would not marry until they had killed an enemy in combat. Archaeological evidence supports these stories. Burial mounds across Ukraine and Russia have revealed the skeletons of young women buried with bows, arrows, and swords, some with battle-inflicted injuries. This was a society where life on the steppe demanded resilience from everyone. Girls learned archery as young as boys, and on the battlefield, gender roles were fluid. The two roles, warrior and mother, were not in conflict. They were complementary. While the Amazon of myth vanished into fantasy, the Scythians were a very real force that terrified the Persians, Greeks, and Macedonians alike. The unstoppable Agagogi. In the small West African kingdom of Dahomey, an army of women known as the Agagogi struck fear into the hearts of European colonizers and rival kingdoms. The French, comparing them to Greek myth, called them the Dahomey Amazons. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the Agagogi were the standing royal guard of the king, but they were far more than that. They were an elite infantry trained to kill and never retreat. Recruited as young girls, they were separated from their families and placed into intense, brutal training. They swore oaths of celibacy and absolute loyalty to the king. They carried muskets, machetes, and clubs, but their most lethal weapon was their fearless psychological presence. European observers were shocked by their brutality and tenacity. During the Franco-Dahomeyan Wars, the Agagogi fought a technologically superior force with relentless night raids and ambushes. Their ferocity forced French commanders to reconsider their tactics and their assumptions about women in combat. The Agagogi existed in a deeply patriarchal world, yet they carved out a space of total autonomy. They advised kings, performed ceremonial duties, and shaped foreign policy with their blades. Though their kingdom ultimately fell, their legend never died. In the shadowy pages of medieval Japan, a legendary figure emerges from the blood and chaos of the Genpei War, Tomoe Gozen, a samurai warrior of the late 12th century. She was not a mere symbolic figure, but a formidable commander, a skilled swordswoman, and a master archer. Her story is famously told in the epic Tale of the Heike, where she is described as a woman of both remarkable beauty and lethal skill. Tomoe served under the warlord Minamoto no Yoshinaka, her possible lover, and was at the very heart of his campaign. She led troops into battle and reportedly single-handedly slew multiple enemies in combat. At the Battle of Awazu, facing certain defeat, Tomoe chose to fight. In her most legendary act, she is said to have dismounted a charging enemy horseman, wrestled him to the ground, and beheaded him on the spot. After the war, her fate is shrouded in mystery. Some say she was captured, others that she became a nun, and some believe she simply vanished. But her legacy endures as a symbol of unwavering courage and skill in a world that sought to confine her.
In the 1st century CE, the Roman Empire was at its peak, but it was nearly brought to its knees by a flame-haired Celtic queen from Britain, Boudica. She was the wife of a client king who, upon his death, had his land seized by Rome, his wife publicly flogged, and his daughters violated. This brutal humiliation sparked a wildfire of rebellion. In 60 or 61 CE, Boudica united several British tribes and led one of the most ferocious revolts in Roman history. Leading her army from a chariot with a spear in hand, she was part priestess, part general, and all fury. Her forces razed Roman cities, including Londinium, and slaughtered an estimated 70,000 people. Although the Romans eventually crushed her rebellion with superior discipline and tactics, Boudica's legacy grew into a powerful symbol of resistance against tyranny.
A force of nature. In the war-torn steppes of Central Asia, a woman emerged who terrified warriors and embarrassed princes, not with a sword, but with her sheer physical dominance. Her name was Kutulun, the great-great-granddaughter of Genghis Khan. But she did not simply ride in his shadow, she carved out her own legend. Born around 1260 CE, Kutulun was the daughter of Kaidu Khan, a powerful rival to Kublai Khan. She was raised as a warrior prince, trained in archery, horse riding, and battlefield tactics. However, her most famous skill was in wrestling, a sport she loved. Kutulun famously declared that she would not marry any man who could defeat her in a wrestling match. If a suitor failed, he would have to give her horses. According to the famous explorer Marco Polo, she amassed a staggering 10,000 horses in this way. She fought alongside her father in battle and was a key military advisor. Her ferocity and strength were so legendary that stories of her would later inspire the opera Turandot. In the war-torn steppes of Central Asia, a woman named Kutulun defied all conventions. As the great-great-granddaughter of Genghis Khan, she was raised like a warrior prince. While she was skilled in archery and horsemanship, her greatest talent lay in wrestling. She famously vowed to marry only a man who could defeat her in a match. Dozens of suitors tried, and all failed, each one wagering and losing horses, gold, or herds to her. It is said she amassed over 10,000 horses from her victories, making her one of the wealthiest women on the steppe. Kutulun wasn't just a champion. She was a fierce warrior who fought alongside her father, Kaidu Khan, and served as his most trusted military advisor. He even considered making her his successor, an unprecedented move in a male-dominated culture. Her strength and influence were so legendary that even the famed explorer Marco Polo wrote of her. Kutulun proved that in the heart of the most patriarchal empire on earth, a woman could rise to power not because she was allowed to, but because no one could stop her. In a time when women had no rights, a French peasant girl named Joan of Arc not only wore armor, but led armies. Born in 1412, Joan claimed to hear divine voices that commanded her to drive the English from France. Her conviction earned her an audience with the future King Charles VII, who, despite his skepticism, sent her to lead the besieged city of Orleans. Clad in white armor, Joan's mere presence revitalized the French troops' spirit. She led charges, braved arrows, and rallied the soldiers under fire. Against all odds, the French lifted the siege, and Joan became a national hero. After a string of victories, she escorted Charles to Reims, where he was crowned king. But her success came with enemies. She was captured, tried for heresy and witchcraft, and burned at the stake at the age of 19. Her death only magnified her legend, and she was later canonized as a saint. As the samurai class of Japan was being dismantled in the late 1860s, one young woman, Nakano Takeko, made a final stand for the old ways. Born into a respected family of warriors, she was trained in martial arts from a young age, with her favorite weapon being the naginata, a bladed polearm. By her 20s, her skill rivaled that of the best men in her domain. When the Boshin War broke out, Nakano formed an unofficial unit of female fighters known as the Joshigun, or Women's Army. Dressed in traditional armor, these women fought fiercely to defend their way of life. At the Battle of Aizu, Nakano led her unit in hand-to-hand combat against imperial troops armed with rifles. Her courage and skill were a testament to the dying traditions of the samurai. On the battlefield, Nakano Takeko fought until she was mortally wounded. According to witnesses, she was shot in the chest, but unwilling to be captured, she asked her sister to behead her. Her body was buried at a temple, her sword beside her. Today, statues of her stand in Japan, a testament to her bravery and her refusal to surrender to a world that was rapidly changing. Lady Death. In the smoldering ruins of World War II, a name that struck fear into German soldiers was Lyudmila Pavlichenko, a Soviet sniper nicknamed Lady Death. She was a real-life war hero with 309 confirmed kills, including 36 enemy snipers, making her the most lethal female sniper in history. When the war broke out, Lyudmila, a 24-year-old history student, refused to become a nurse and instead volunteered for a combat role. Her patience and nerves of steel earned her a formidable reputation on the front lines. Her fame was so great that she was sent on a diplomatic tour of the United States, where she met President Franklin D. Roosevelt. After the war, she became a historian and trained future generations of Soviet snipers. Lyudmila's legacy endures as a powerful symbol that in war, a woman's place is wherever she chooses to fight. The unwritten pages. For every famous name like Boudica or Lyudmila Pavlichenko, countless others have been erased from history. History was largely written by men, and the stories of warrior women were often omitted or downplayed. But they were there all along. Consider the Trung sisters of Vietnam, who in the 1st century CE led a rebellion against Chinese occupation. They rode elephants into battle and ruled an independent state for 3 years. Or Ya Asantewa of the Ashanti Empire, who in 1900 led a rebellion against British forces. There were also Viking shield maidens, Apache women fighters, and countless others who fought to protect their families and their way of life. Today, these stories are being reclaimed, reminding us that history is not just what was written, but also what was erased. In ancient Mesopotamia, music was not just entertainment, it was a powerful part of life and ritual. The lyre, one of the world's earliest stringed instruments, was central to this culture. Dating back over 4,500 years, the lyres discovered in the Sumerian city of Ur were not simple instruments. They were elaborate works of art, adorned with gold, silver, and lapis lazuli. The most famous example, the bull-headed lyre, was more than just a beautiful object. The bull was a symbol of strength and may have held spiritual significance. The lyre's haunting, resonant tone was used in temple ceremonies, royal courts, and even funeral rites. Clay tablets with early musical notation show that the Mesopotamians had a sophisticated understanding of music theory. These instruments were a sacred bridge between the human and the divine, used to mourn the dead and honor the gods.
Music was an integral part of their society, and musicians held a respected role, serving as priestesses and court performers. While the lyres sang gently to the gods, the aulos was the instrument of raw, unbridled emotion in ancient Greece. This double-piped, reed-blown wind instrument was not a gentle flute. It was a wild, emotional, and powerful force. Associated with Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, the aulos was used in rituals, theater, and military marches. The aulos player, or aulates, would play both pipes simultaneously, producing a dense, penetrating sound that required incredible breath control. This instrument was not for background music. It was meant to stir the blood, add mood to plays by Sophocles and Euripides, and keep soldiers marching in step. Even the philosopher Plato, who found it too emotionally overwhelming for his ideal society, could not deny its power to evoke sorrow, fury, and euphoria. The aulos was about release, not perfection. In ancient China, music was a philosophical art form, and two-string zithers, the qin and the guzheng, embodied this perfectly. The qin, an ancient seven-stringed instrument, produced a quiet, subtle sound that was believed to cultivate moral character and inner harmony. It was the instrument of scholars and sages like Confucius, and learning to play it was seen as a path to becoming civilized. In contrast, the guzheng was a younger, louder cousin with a brighter sound and a more public role. With 16 to 21 strings, it was built for performance, with a sound that could mimic galloping horses or flowing rivers. While the qin whispered to the soul, the guzheng sang to the crowd. Both were respected and were integral to ritual and storytelling, representing the balance of art and philosophy in Chinese culture. In ancient Egypt, music was considered a sacred tool, a form of divine communication that resonated through temples, tombs, and every corner of daily life. From pharaohs to peasants, music was everywhere. It was used to soothe laborers, honor the dead, guide religious rituals, and entertain the living. The instruments that shaped this soundscape were as diverse as the Nile itself, and each one served a specific, often symbolic purpose. Musicians, both male and female, held a respected place in society. They memorized complex songs and melodies that were passed down orally from generation to generation. Many of them were trained from a young age in specialized schools for musicians and scribes. Even today, as we look at the intricate carvings on tomb walls and temple friezes, we see images of harpists and flautists, a testament to the importance of their craft. But while the music of the Egyptian courts may have been elegant and refined, there were other sounds in the ancient world that were more primal and powerful. While the Mesopotamian lyre sang gently to the gods, the aulos of ancient Greece screamed, wept, and danced through the hearts of men. This double-piped, reed-blown wind instrument was no gentle flute. It was wild, emotional, and unrelenting. In ancient Greece, music was not just entertainment, it was a force that shaped the very soul. The aulos, associated with Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and madness, was often played during dramatic performances, military marches, and wild rituals. It produced a dense, penetrating sound, closer to a bagpipe than a modern flute. The musicians, known as auletes, had to master a technique called circular breathing, which allowed them to play continuously without pause. This effort often warped their faces, a subject of much mockery, yet their skill was revered in many circles. The aulos could mimic sorrow, stir fury, or evoke euphoria, sometimes all in the same breath. Its blaring voice cut through the chaos of battle, keeping soldiers marching in step. In the theater, it added mood and momentum to tragedies by Sophocles and Euripides.
Even Plato, who famously dismissed it as too emotionally overwhelming for his ideal republic, could not deny its power. Unlike the mathematically balanced lyre, the aulos was not about perfection, it was about raw emotional release. Meanwhile, in the ancient courts and scholar studios of China, music was not just an art, it was philosophy in motion. Two-stringed zithers, the qin and the guzheng, carried the sounds of dynasties, meditation, and poetic introspection. The qin, with its subtle, quiet tones, was the instrument of scholars and sages. It was believed to cultivate moral character and inner harmony. Confucius himself was said to play the qin, seeing it not as a tool for performance, but as a path to becoming a civilized man. In contrast, the guzheng was a younger, louder cousin. With 16 to 21 strings, it was built for performance, with a bright, dramatic sound. Its music could mimic galloping horses, flowing rivers, or weeping lovers, all through vibrating silk strings and masterful fingerwork. Where the qin whispered to the soul, the guzheng sang to the crowd. Both instruments, though, were deeply respected and were an integral part of the Confucian ideals of a balanced education. They were living echoes of China's ancient soul, a reminder that for some, music was not only heard, but felt. Music of the cosmos. In ancient India, music was seen as cosmic engineering. According to Hindu philosophy, the universe was created from sound, the primordial vibration of Om. From this belief, a complex musical tradition was born, rooted in ritual, mathematics, and spiritual transformation. Early texts like the Vedas contain sacred hymns meant to be sung, with specific melodies designed to align the soul with divine forces. Instruments served both sonic and symbolic roles. The veena, a plucked string instrument, became a symbol of divine expression and wisdom, associated with the goddess Saraswati. Its strings were believed to echo the vibrations of the cosmos. The bansuri, a bamboo flute, was a vehicle of myth, often played by the god Krishna. Its sound was said to transport listeners to a higher state of consciousness. Percussion instruments like the tabla mirrored heartbeats and cosmic cycles, their complex talas or rhythms linked to emotional states. Indian music was designed to evoke specific emotional flavors or rasas to stir the soul and guide meditation. Unlike many ancient traditions lost to time, India's musical roots have not only survived, but evolved, a testament to the belief that to make music is to touch the divine. The sacred pulse of Mesoamerica. In the ancient cities of Mesoamerica, music was inseparable from the sacred. It was a form of ritual technology used to speak to gods, sanctify offerings, and terrify enemies. Drums dominated the soundscape, with the huehuetl, a tall, single-headed drum, beating like the heartbeat of the gods during festivals and sacrifices. Another iconic instrument was the teponatzli, a slit drum made of hollowed wood. It was said that this drum could sing the names of deities or the rhythms of fate itself. Wind instruments were also central, with flutes made of bone or clay often shaped like animals or gods. The infamous Aztec death whistle, for example, produced a blood-chilling shriek used to strike terror into enemies. Musicians were trained in special schools, performing not for crowds, but for the gods. Music was an integral part of every major event, from birth to warfare, serving as a powerful link between humans, the divine, and the spirit world. In Mesoamerica, music was so sacred that playing it incorrectly could be seen as a spiritual offense. It was a form of ritual technology, an invisible thread that connected humans to the divine. Drums throbbed, flutes wailed, and conch shells howled during sacrifices, guiding souls and keeping the cosmic order in balance. Music in this civilization wasn't meant to entertain, it was meant to transform. Though the ancient civilizations of the world have long since fallen, their music has never truly died. It lives on, not always in sound, but in our rituals, our designs, and our cultural DNA. Unlike modern music, ancient melodies were not meant to be recorded. They were passed down through hands, mouths, and hearts, a living tradition encoded in memory. Instruments like the Chinese kin and the Indian veena are still played today, embodying centuries of philosophy and meditation with every note. In Africa, the drums still speak, and their rhythms echo ancient practices that predate written history. The haunting breath of the Andean siku and the thunder of Native American drums are a constant reminder of ancestral voices. Even modern Western music owes a debt to these ancient traditions. The seven-note scale used in Mesopotamia laid the foundation for modern harmony, and Greek music theory influenced the development of classical music. The lyre evolved into the guitar, and the aulos inspired the oboe and bassoon. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of ancient music is its purpose. It wasn't made to sell records or top charts. It was a tool for ritual and healing. It marked birth and death, planting and harvest, love and war. It was a sacred language that could stir emotions, build communities, and connect us to a world that existed long before our own. In a world full of noise, these ancient songs remind us that sound can be sacred and that melody can be a thread between worlds.